All right, welcome again to everyone joining us today for our monthly Housing Strategies Peer Exchange. Today's topic is a panel discussion on implementation of fast track requirements that are specifically in Proposition 123. We'll get into the details in a moment. I want to thank our panelists who are sharing their local experience and perspective as they've been working on fast track implementation efforts. And while I have some questions prepared for them, we also invite audience questions during the session. So as we're on a particular topic, we invite you to just raise your hand or add questions in the chat. And then my co-hosts, Lisa LaRanger and Mitch Hendrick, will help me field those questions so that we can have a robust dialogue between our panelists and all participants today. I'm going to move us along. What we normally do in this session is we start with some brief announcements before we get into our main topic. And then usually we save Q&A for the end, but again, we would welcome your questions as we move through the various topics of the discussion. And briefly, I just wanted to highlight that future sessions in the next upcoming months, this is usually on the third Thursday of each month. And in June, that puts us on the Juneteenth holiday. It's a state holiday. I hope many of you get to enjoy some time off. And so we will cancel this series in the month of June. But join us in July for an exciting session on ADU financing, strategies, and learn more about the new ADU grant program that DOLA will be launching in the fall. And then in August, our session will be on local financing strategies. Local governments are utilizing state and federal funding for affordable housing, but some communities have established a local funding source as well. So that will be a great topic. So briefly, we have a few announcements, and as I tell you about them verbally, they will be added to the chat. First off, the Affordable Housing Toolkit for local officials lives on the DOLA website. Division of Housing has created this, and the newest module will be on homelessness response and services. The survey is asking for input from local governments on what that new module should contain. Tomorrow is the deadline to respond to that survey, so we really welcome your input on what that content should include. The local planning capacity grant has a current funding cycle open with applications due next week, Friday, May 30th by noon. If you're interested in submitting an application and you have not already reached out to me, please do schedule a pre-application meeting. Also due next week, the University of Denver has an executive certificate in affordable housing program, which is a September through June program. Applications to join the next cohort are due May 30th. MSU Denver also has a new program, Intro to Affordable Housing Finance, that also begins in the fall, and registration is open now. Also upcoming on June 13th, there is an ADU Academy in Denver, and that's an opportunity to become an ADU specialist. That's an in-person session. The also related is the new ADU grant program, which will be announced, more details to be announced late in summer. And there is a survey opportunity. Mitch, would you like to say anything more about that, or does it?
It's somewhat self-explanatory, but it is a quick interest form survey. We're trying to gauge demand and also, as we develop the program guidelines, better understand what your needs are to support ADUs in your community. So it should only take a few minutes. If you're interested in the ADU program and or becoming a ADU certified supportive jurisdiction, please complete that survey or reach out to me and let me know if you have questions. Thanks.
Mitch, you want to take the next one on housing planning grant program?
Sure thing. In addition to the ADU grant program survey, I've placed a note in the chat about the housing planning grant program, which some of you have already applied and received funding for. The next round for the housing planning grant program opens June 9th and closes July 11th, and that can fund housing needs assessments, housing action plans, water supply elements, and strategic growth elements in comprehensive plans. So reach out to Ashley Basham at the email in the chat if you're interested in the program. We'd love to see some more applications come in the second round.
Great. All right, we're going to move into some fast track announcements. You may have heard that DOLA is offering incentive awards for early adoption of Prop 123 Fast Track. These incentive awards have apparently generated a flurry of interest in getting your fast track policies adopted early because we've been hearing from many of you. But in case you hadn't heard, just to recognize that the law allows local governments time for implementation. Good planning work takes time, so we encourage you to get started early. It is not required until 2027, so we hope you are able to meet the statutory deadline of December 31st, 2026. But if you're able to adopt early, this incentive funding up to $50,000 with no local match can be awarded, and funds can be spent on eligible planning costs and activities that will help your community advance your affordable housing goals. So the priority is to adopt 1 year early by the end of 2025, or we believe funds will still be available for those who adopt in early 2026. Though the funding amount may be slightly lower. All right. The other important thing to know is that once you've adopted, you'll need to submit your fast track policies and procedures, a little narrative about what that means in your community. And you get to excuse me. First, before you submit, I wanted to let you know about our new guidance that is coming on the Fast Track website. So the existing page is getting some new updates. The most recent new update is that we've kind of got a new and improved downloadable template resolution. And many of you were having trouble finding it. It was a little buried on the page. Now it should be really easy to find on that page. And it's got a little more specific language, but also coming soon, we will be publishing a self-assessment checklist. So you can say, does my local policy align with all these key elements in that Prop 123 requires, such as how do you define a complete application, which application types are relevant in your community, how do you handle extensions, exemptions, all those details will be in that checklist. We'll have some helpful fact sheets, new and improved strategies and best practices, and we will soon start publishing a list of which communities have adopted and submitted their fast track policies. And some communities have allowed us to share links to their ordinance or their land use code update or resolution. So stay tuned, that is coming soon. Okay. When you have a draft policy, if you would like some feedback, we can offer courtesy review. If you have questions while you're working on your policy adoption and something in the law is not clear, you're welcome to reach out. Happy to meet with your team or answer questions over email. So please do reach out. Of course, DOLA is not offering legal advice. You'll need to consult with your own municipal or county attorney for that legal counsel, but just want to make sure you know that this is available. And then when you are ready to submit your adopted policies, you'll go to the Prop 123 website, click on that compliance button, and then there is a Prop 123 reporting portal. And it looks a little something like this when you get in there, right? You'll enter your jurisdiction name. There's a little area for a narrative, a place to upload files, and that's what you can expect when you get there. We'll receive that, we review, we'll determine approval, or if we need more information. And if you've done that before the end of 2025, I'll be reaching out and saying we can now proceed to incentive award contract processing. All righty, so without further ado, I'd like to get into our panel discussion and introduce our panelists. The slides will go away in a moment, but as we introduce our panelists, I'm just going to ask them to each briefly introduce themselves, including their role and their jurisdiction, their community they represent, and then also share the status of their community's fast track efforts thus far, and when do you expect to be ready to submit final policy adoption through the Prop 123 portal. That's our brief introduction. Carl, can I ask you to lead us off?
Absolutely. I'm Carl Onsager. I'm the current planning supervisor with the city of Golden, so I oversee our development review team. My community is the city of Golden, and the status of our fast track process. So we adopted our process into our zoning code in January called the 123 Affordable Housing Go process. And that was submitted to DOLA and accepted recently. So no take-backsies.
Great. Thank you, Carl. Dawn, can you please introduce yourself?
Sure. Good morning, everybody. My name is Don Threewitt. I'm the Deputy Director of Community Development for the City of Greeley. I oversee long-range and current planning, engineering, development review, building, landscape architecture, and civil inspections. We are a fast-growing community. We are, I would say, mostly there as far as our goals for Prop 123 and the fast track process. Our final goal is to get a standalone affordable housing code chapter adopted and integrated into our development code, not just to document the fast track process, but to document certain relief measures and dimensional standards and density bonuses that we're going to allow specifically for affordable housing. That is on track for August adoption. We just got the draft for review. Caleb's on here, I think yesterday, maybe the day before yesterday. So we're in the home stretch.
Thank you, Don, and apologies for the typo in spelling of your name. And folks, you can see that our panelists, this is a work in progress for some, right? So we're all learning as we go. Lucy, can you please introduce yourself?
My name is Lucy Mulvihill. I'm the Community Development Director for the town of Silverton. And we adopted our fast tracking ordinance in January. It was enacted in February. It has been unofficially reviewed by DOLA. We haven't submitted it yet. And we found one issue with it that we're working on addressing right now. And we expect to fix that and submit the final policy no later than September. But despite that issue, we've started implementing it, and we used the policy to approve a site plan for 9 units of affordable housing back in February. Really the day it was enacted, we started using it. So it's been great for us so far.
Great. And Jace, please introduce yourself.
Yeah, no, thank you, Robin. I'm Jace Hockwalt. Apologies for the lack of camera feed today. I'm waving at all of you, just know that. But tried to troubleshoot all this morning, just didn't work out. But I'm the Community Development Director at the City of Montrose, so on the Western Slope out here as well. I also was a city planner over at the City of Grand Junction for about 5 years, so pretty familiar with kind of rural communities and the Western Slope. But from our standpoint, regarding the fast track process, we actually did a major code update, a major code overhaul, really, throughout 2023 and 2024. And that was adopted in December of 2024. And that did include some language specific to a 90-day review process for affordable housing development. So we lumped that in with really a larger code update process from our end, but haven't submitted it formally to DOLA, but have been in many conversations kind of throughout that process, even last year as we went through it, but we'll be submitting that shortly.
Thank you. And I'm going to stop sharing the screen now so that we can be a little more interactive with our participants. Again, jump in and ask questions as we go. And so my next question to kick us off is just to recognize that implementing fast track is going to look different from one community to the next, partly because even though you're all working towards a common outcome, your paths will inevitably be different because there's so much variation in existing policies, local policies. And thankfully, Prop 123 allows for a lot of variety in local approaches as long as you achieve the intended outcomes, which is a review process that's decided within 90 days per application. So briefly, panelists, can you share, and let's start off with Lucy this time and we'll rotate. Can you share whether your implementation effort has involved land use code updates, changes in administrative policies and procedures, technology investments, or any others? And do you plan to codify that with an ordinance or a resolution or other? Lucy.
So similar to Montrose, we actually included a fast tracking policy in a larger comprehensive land use code update that was completed back in January. This was really great for us. We worked with Clarion Associates, who have worked a lot with DOLA, so they had a lot of experience in implementing programs like this. So what we did through that process is we updated our definition of affordable housing, and then we created an administrative review process to expedite qualifying affordable housing projects. So it mostly went into the land use code side.
Great. Over to Jace.
Yeah, actually very similar from that standpoint, specific to the code adoption. So we did that via ordinance, again, as kind of a bulk major code amendment process or code update process. What we also did as well within that was we had some specific hearing requirements for multifamily projects that had more than one building. So we eliminated that hearing process requirement, made that administrative, which streamlined that process substantially. We've also incorporated some language specific to reduction in timelines for notification and other things if there is a hearing that's involved. So that was helpful. And then lastly, from a software standpoint, we're actually in the process, and we received the LPC grant last cycle, or I think late last year, specific to permitting system. So we're updating our permitting software, which will incorporate a specific category for affordable housing to make sure we hit those deadlines and such to keep that 90-day process moving forward. So a little bit of both, but primarily on the code side.
Great. And how about over to Golden?
Yeah, absolutely. So our effort focused on a regulatory overhaul of our process and procedures chapter, in which we were able to incorporate that 1, 2, 3 affordable housing go process into that. So focused on more of the regulatory side and gave us some flexibility, or basically some codified standards to move meetings around, not eliminate any meetings, but also kind of shorten some of those notice timelines and other details to get something to a final decision within that 90 days. We're also just always doing process improvement. So looking at our processes, procedures overall, not necessarily specific to affordable housing, but just overall for our development review processes. So that's been a part of it, but not specifically related to affordable housing.
All right. And Dawn with Greeley.
Well, first off, I think we were set up for success prior to this coming in, and I wanted to throw a shout out. My predecessors really focused on really building efficiency and speed into our process before I even got here. So, you know, Mike Garrett, Becky Safrick, and Brad Mueller really kind of made the job easy for us. We started by looking at let's take a look at what strategies we need and go from there. So we started with a process mapping value streaming exercise with all our development review staff, identified really where the choke points were in our process, came up with a laundry list of strategies we wanted to implement, but we wanted to try them 1 or 2 at a time so that we could see what's working and what isn't. So we kind of went backwards. We started with the let's enact it and finish with the code, right? So between that, you know, we've got you know, a scoping and pre-op process. It's very robust. We've gone through a lot of off-ramps and alternatives. But I think the biggest change that we made was we reversed our referral process. And that we can maybe talk about a little bit later, but we really focused on what were the biggest bottlenecks in the referral process. Almost unanimously came out as this is where we're really getting slowed down. So we took a deep dive into that, and our staff came up with a pretty elegant solution. As far as technology improvements, we already had Trackit online software that worked pretty well for us. And then again, we're culminating kind of all of our changes into the code update and going from there.
Great, thank you all. All right, our next question, and again, I welcome audience questions in the chat, or you can raise your hand and ask verbally. But our next question is, how have you engaged key stakeholders so far? Have you met with the development community, external review agencies such as utility districts, or to what extent does this require interdepartmental collaboration within your jurisdiction? And what have you learned from those discussions? How has it shaped your policy approach? Let's start with Dawn. Why don't you kick us off? We're just kind of rotate who starts.
Sure. So as far as stakeholder outreach, we have engaged with our Housing Advisory Board, our Affordable Housing Code TAC, and then Planning Commission, City Council. We're going in Tuesday to kind of lay out the entirety of the program in our Affordable Housing Land Use Center. We have a future open house specific for developers on June 4th, and we're actually going through all of our design standard and procedural updates from water and sewer, from utilities, from stormwater, and kind of almost doing a training class for everything that's been updated over the last couple of years for our developers. We're hoping to start doing that on an annual basis. And then we'll be scheduling a housing open house in several actually leading up to the code adoption. One thing is we do have a separate housing department, and they're on their own. They're working on their own strategic plan. So there was a developer open house that really focused on that. And we were able to get in and engage really one-on-one with a lot of our development community and talk through it. I should say for our affordable housing TAC, we've got all of our local affordable housing developers as part of that TAC. So these are the users that are actually giving us feedback in real time as we implement these strategies.
Great. Lucy, how has Silverton engaged stakeholders?
Yeah, so like I said, we did a comprehensive land use code update, which gave us a lot of avenues to work with local stakeholders, including, all of our departments, our referral agencies that we send all of our applications to. Through that process, we shortened the referral timeline. And so worked with them on that, to make sure that we could be compliant with this and still have our referral agencies reviewing each application. We don't have a ton of local affordable housing developers. We do have a few builders that work on affordable housing, and so they were a big part of this land use code update and got to comment on this. We really use the land use code update process as a mechanism to work with local stakeholders. Affordable housing is extremely important to the Silverton community, and it was one of our biggest priorities in our master planning process. And so people really love this fast tracking program. The one thing we did hear feedback on is concern that this could potentially be a mechanism for developers to have an expedited review on a project by slapping a short-term affordability sticker on a project. And so that's something that we worked on while we were creating this policy, and something that we're going to continue to work on to make sure that, the affordable housing projects that are eligible for this program are ones that will stay affordable for a long time to come.
Right. Jace, how about in Montrose, engaging key stakeholders?
Yeah, so really we started in 2022 when we started the housing needs assessment for the city of Montrose. So we kicked that off in late 2022, and that involved a huge amount of public engagement from the start. Surveys to the public, surveys to the development community, and the like. So that finished up in May of 2023, if I'm not mistaken. And then from that point, we hit the ground running with the code, really the major code overhaul process. So we kind of leaned into that initial engagement and continued that along throughout the code update process as we incorporated more housing related items. I think what we see in Montrose, and I think what the Western Slope really sees, really frankly, probably the whole state, is detached single family residential. So we really focused on housing diversity and then also incorporating specific definition for affordable housing. And to Lucy's kind of thought there, as far as we also had concerns from the general public about, what is affordable housing, and how do you kind of keep that in perpetuity or keep that long term. So we've added some language within our code that basically a deed restriction or some form of kind of long-term approval that would be recorded is going to be required for a development to kind of fall under that categorization. But yeah, we kept them in the loop, really all stakeholders in the loop. We had a ton of council support throughout the process for this, recognizing the need for housing and really the growth in home prices and housing costs versus our income, which didn't grow nearly as fast. So frequent and often over the last 2.5, 3 years.
Great, thanks. And lastly, to Carl with Golden on the stakeholder engagement question.
Yeah, absolutely. So we definitely leaned on, I think, our original Prop 123 commitment and led with that we were already, kind of dedicated to this process. And ultimately, we really started with City Council and asking them questions of what was their direction. Were they interested in potentially maybe cutting Planning Commission out of certain decisions, and just cutting pieces of the process out if they were going to ultimately be the final decision maker. And we felt that was valuable. Just if they wanted to kind of just keep the process, but do it faster, smarter, better, then we wouldn't be going out to the development community or say, do you want less process? Yes. And then council says, no. We wanted to keep it the same, but just different. And so we also had, by chance, a affordable housing project application while we were working on the draft code. And so we were able to use that as kind of our sounding board of, well, what if this? And really helped us with some of those questions of, how do you know it's an affordable project? How do you know that it's complete? And that really helped inform a lot of that drafting process. But, ultimately, it was going back to Planning Commission and City Council to say, okay, we came up with this process based on your direction. Does it make sense? If yes, then, it got adopted, and, luckily it did.
Great, thank you all. And we've got some great questions in the chat. Keep them coming. I'll read Mark's question. Can the panelists address how, if any, changes to minimum public hearing notices in a local paper or general circulation as required by state law? And I'm just going to add to that, things like neighborhood meetings that might be required. How have you addressed those community engagement and public notice elements in your policy? Let's start with Carl.
Yeah, absolutely. So in consolidating, so, just our processes and procedures were scattered throughout our zoning code. And so by consolidating them into one chapter, gave us an opportunity to also revise some disparate notice processes. We actually, in this effort, did remove newspaper notice. We're not a statutory community, so if that's being relied on CRS to get those, that's the deal. But ultimately, we were able to, look at those and just, rather than a 14-day notice, we changed it to a 7-day notice, with some, when scheduling these, just doing double notices and all that sort of stuff. So that's really where we focused our efforts in cutting some of that extra time out.
Great. I'm just going to open it to our other panelists. How have you handled that? You can self-select.
Don here. So in our 2019 code overhaul, a lot of our processes moved to administrative. So really, when this came out, the only ones that were really subject to hearing were used by special review and variances. So in a lot of cases, those are the only ones that need hearing notice. So what we're really looking at doing is part of that pre-application process is really application scheduling and timelines so that we can hit when that application comes in, we can give them a hearing date. And I think that drives really our applicants to put their best foot forward as soon as they come in. So this is one of those strategies that we have not fully test driven yet, but it's on the list to get done by August.
Yeah, Silverton had a similar approach. We moved as many things as we could to administrative review, and also removed requirements for public hearings and public notice when not required by CRS. And we follow the minimum requirement for noticing, which is 15 days. And noticing hasn't been a huge issue for us since we've made those changes.
Very similar approach in Montrose as well. As we still have kind of mandatory requirements per our code, but with the adoption for affordable housing and that 90-day approval, we've allowed kind of a reduction to that, to essentially CRS standards if needed. We've also tried to push more things administrative. That is tougher in a kind of more rural community when city council does want their hands on more things. But we were able to get away with that and move forward with that for multifamily. Formerly, it used to be a plan development process requirement when there was multiple buildings. And we're fortunate to move away from that and create that as fully administrative. So that was a huge factor and really appreciated by the development community.
Great, thank you. We've got another great question in the chat from Nicole. Kind of two questions, but I think they're related. What's considered affordable and how many units are required to be affordable? And I'll just briefly share that in Proposition 123, expedited review is not required for all housing projects. It's only required for those housing projects where 50% of the units are affordable, and local governments can define affordability in their local policy as long as it's not more restrictive than the minimum required in statute. So I'm going to pass it to our panelists again, self-select who's going to go first. How have you defined which housing projects are eligible for expedited review? And feel free to share anything else about your local definition that is trying to incentivize more of certain types of housing, as opposed to just using the minimum in statute. Yeah, who wants to kick us off?
I'll start this time. So we've kind of specifically put within our code that affordable housing refers to rental housing with basically with the units at 60% AMI or less. So that's, and then basically for sale housing for anything below 100% AMI. We didn't have any unit count specifics because we didn't want to hamstring any developers. Again, smaller community, we didn't feel that that was necessary from that front. But that's really how we defined it: is rental product 60% or lower, for sale product 100% or lower AMI.
I'll hop in. We defined affordable housing as rental units that are affordable to a household with an annual income of 80% AMI, and for sale housing that's affordable to a household with an annual income below 140% AMI. So we're a bit higher on the AMI limit. And we adopted a fast tracking policy that required affordability time clause for 99 years. And we found that that was too restrictive. for what Prop 123 allows. So we are working on an amendment right now to make sure that our code meets the Prop 123 requirements. But really, our goal is to have is to see affordable housing that remains affordable long term. And so we're working to make sure that we can somehow incorporate some mechanism to make sure that the eligible projects are long-term affordable housing.
Don here. When we looked at this, we said, well, do we want to go a little further? A group called Development Strategies did a housing needs assessment right before all this really came out, and we saw our council policy is really housing for all, and so we had a really good look at the entire stratum of housing products in the community and where the needs really were. For those of you that know Greeley, know that we probably have a shortage of executive level housing. We also have a shortage of higher end professional housing, as well as our affordable and our supportive housing. So we're really kind of all over the gamut as far as what our needs were. And so when we actually sat down and said, okay, well, what do we want to include in this? It was, well, how about all housing? And then economic development kind of came in, and well, what about a great economic development prospect? So we said, well, you know what, why don't we just not stop there? Let's do 90% of all development review completed in 90 days. And so that has been our goal from the outset. We aren't really separating out affordable housing or even housing when we're looking at development review. Our goal is really how fast can we how can we get to this with the processes here as fast as we can without sacrificing quality? And that's really what we're looking at, is quality review fast. I'm going to share my screen real quick. Oh, can't share. Okay. So we set up a dashboard and we've really tracked all applications to see where we're at. And so far, we're at 79 days across the board for all eligible. So we've already kind of hit our mark. Now we're really focusing on how do we keep things, how do we do it thoroughly, and how do we make sure, how do we have all the fail safes in place to make sure that affordable housing units hit that mark 100% of the time. So that's really what we're focusing on.
I'll hop in here. So for Golden, we have a provision that says if you're developing multi-household in a commercial zone, you have to have a 25% floor area mix for commercial, 75% can be residential. If you drop below that 25% commercial threshold, you trigger a special use permit process, which is approved by Planning Commission. Last year, we did change that. So if you have a 100% affordable housing project, then you are still a permitted use. You don't trigger that whole special use permit. So we relied on those definitions for both for sale and for rental, which were tied to the Prop 123 thresholds. And then for our 123 Affordable Housing Go process, we simply added in a qualifying affordable housing project definition, which said, if you're one of those two definitions, if your 50% of those units are, affordable, either at 60% AMI for rental or 100 for sale, if 50% of those units, then you qualify for 123 Affordable Housing Go.
Great, thank you all. And we've got a request question from Lisa in the chat. Can any of the panelists share their policies and procedures? If they're publicly available, can you put the links in this chat? I would offer that anybody on this call, if you have something you'd like to share, please do. And again, DOLA will be publishing a list, and then communities that have said yes, feel free to share my policy, like for example, Carl has already offered, will be publishing that on our site, so you can reference that list and those links. So our next question, I just want to talk about the, Prop 123 defines that 90-day timeline as starting when the applicant has submitted a complete application But the statute allows the local government to define what constitutes a complete application. And so how has your community, each of your communities addressed this, both in terms of how you define a complete application and how you help applicants get to this starting point? For example, have you created checklists, process mapping? Do you hold pre-application meetings with applicants? Any other strategies on that front end to get to day one of that review process in a more streamlined and efficient fashion? Who would like to kick us off?
Yeah, I'll go ahead and hop in here. So I would put in a serious plug for if you're looking at your processes, either through a code adoption or through just policy, process mapping, and even using programs. I think Visio through Microsoft, it looks like they maybe loosened up their license standards, so they have a little bit more access. Or just, drawing it out on a sketchboard or a whiteboard with sticky notes and saying, okay, here's where this goes. Here's your major milestones in a development. Because I think this is one that, when we map this out, that really became a question of, if an application comes in, and I think all done this where it comes into the bucket or whatever, review portal, it sits there for 7 days. It's technically complete, but you haven't seen it yet. I don't know if anybody's familiar with Schrodinger's cat, but we kind of called this Schrodinger's complete application, whereas both complete and incomplete at the same time. So for us in working through that process, it was, okay, we wrote in a director determination. So it's not just, oh, we submitted it, because we all know applicants, their timeline starts as soon as they have this dream 6 months ago. But for our processes, it is when they get that stamped director certification that is a complete application. And that also means both complete in documents and form, but also, we added into this a technically sufficient completeness. Because if they're not showing a particular setback, or, they tell you that they meet this zoning standard, but they don't show it, well, then it's technically insufficient. Or if, let's say there's a fatal flaw in their, traffic study that doesn't line up with their drainage study, that doesn't line up with how many units they're telling you on their site plan. So those are those technical aspects where it is also incomplete. And again, it's working through on the staff side as quickly as possible of, show, don't tell. But then once that's done, that's what really triggers that 90-day for us, is you both submitted all your documents and they're technically sufficient. Then we can work through is it good? Like that's where the final, hey, you meet all the standards, but we all know it could work better in this neighborhood or in this context if you do these nice little things, please and thank you. But that's kind of the fuzzy stuff that we work through after it's technically sufficient and complete, as they work through their public hearing process if they need it. Right.
Thanks. I want to give other folks a chance to answer this, but a quick time check. We're at 9:45-ish, and we do want to wrap up by 9:55 for folks that need to run to another meeting. So for the rest of our panelists, if you want to quickly speak to your, how do you define a complete application and help folks get to day one, other panelists.
I'll hop in. Silverton is pretty heavy on the pre-application process. And so almost every application requires a pre-app meeting where we go over the application submittal requirements, go over the process, give them a visual of the process, go over the timeline. We can usually give them a hearing date if a hearing is required, and address any concerns that may require additional information. And then we actually have a section in our code which defines when an application is complete, and the completeness review process, which every application goes through. And it states that, staff shall review an application in a reasonable time frame to determine whether or not it's complete. And that a complete application is not missing any required information, including information necessary or sufficient to decide the application. So that gives staff a little bit of wiggle room to review make sure they have everything that's required on their, submittal application checklist. But also if staff identifies any, additional information that we need, that's the time where we try to request it up front. And then every applicant gets a notice of completeness. And that is when our 90 days will start when that letter is issued.
Any others?
I'll jump in quickly. First off, we front loaded the process a lot more heavily from the outset. We added a scoping meeting. I'm sure a lot of you run into these situations where you sit down at a pre-app meeting and somebody's kicking the tires, or they want you to design their project for you, or they're thinking about maybe possibly doing something with housing, maybe on this lot, maybe on that lot. And so we've kind of moved those into the scoping category. If you're not preparing an application for a specific project, you belong in scoping. And that is kind of outside. That's really a consultation, allowing us to kind of help have that discussion with applicants. So that moves our pre-app into, we're putting an application together and we think we're complete. Can you take a look at it? And we're almost getting a first round of review out of our pre-app. That's our goal. So then once that application comes in, we have a pretty good idea of what it's going to look like. The other part is the completeness check. We've got checklists, and we do make sure that all of our scoping and pre-app notes are actually uploaded into Trackit, so we know exactly what was discussed in those meetings as far as requirements, as far as any exceptions or special conditions. And so when that completeness check comes in, somebody can take a look at those, make sure it's all there. We did talk about, and we're going to roll out extending that completeness check to really do a quality check before we determine completeness. So instead of a 3-day completeness, we're doing a 5-day where we're actually going to look at this traffic scoping study, and we're going to look at the geotech, and we're going to look at some of the other pieces to make sure that they are at the level of quality we need to be able to review. And then at that 5 to 7 days, once it's complete, that clock starts. So.
And I can do this in 30 seconds or less here. Pretty similar to kind of across the board. We'll start with a pre-application meeting. We really refer to it as a one-stop shop to bring in all primary players like our city engineer, utilities department, all the fire departments, to really kind of flesh out issues. And then the starting point for us is once we receive, or once it's basically to be referred and kicked out for a first round review. So we'll do a cursory review from the planning standpoint, either the first day or the second day that we get that application, and we will make a determination to kick it out then, or if we see some issues right on the front end that we need to kick back just for minor changes. So.
Great. So we've got some great responses happening in the chat, questions about which consultants have you used. I just want to share briefly that we are DOLA is working with APA Colorado to try and get the consultant directory, member directory updated so that consultants can say these are areas of expertise, local governments looking for someone, whether it's help on a housing needs assessment or expedited review, can go and kind of, promote your RFP to those consulting firms. There was a question about staffing capacity. The local planning capacity grant could be a good fit for you if you need to add capacity to your team, as Greeley has done with these funds. And also, I just want to do a quick shout out before we wrap up that first of all, thank you so much to our panelists for joining. We know many communities are doing a lot of great work out there. Some said we're not quite ready, but we could share later in the year. We will do another version of this in the fall, probably September, maybe October, because I think a lot more communities will be a little farther along and we'll be happy to share. Meanwhile, I think there are some communities that are working on a kind of a support group, community of practice. If anyone wants to share information about how to get involved in that, that's kind of a peer-to-peer, local governments learning directly from each other. Or again, reach out to DOLA for questions. Lisa LaRanger, can you help us with the quick poll that we want to launch? Before everybody leaves, hopefully stick around for a quick couple of minutes. future topics that you want to learn more about. And then also, if this time is not ideal, I mean, obviously, if you're on the call, this time hopefully works for you most of the time. But if it doesn't work for you, we may change the time to a different day of the week or time of day. And so we're looking to hear from you on those topics. So quickly share with us which future topics you're interested in, and any last questions or comments. We can stay on till the top of the hour. Last questions or comments for panelists. MJ Adams has shared the Fast Track Learning Circle contact information for Heidi Grove at Boulder County. Thank you.
One thing I
else?
can mention, and I like the question about capacity within your departments. We're a rural jurisdiction. We move very quickly within development review typically, but what we rely on is the applicant's timeline a lot too. And I'm guessing this is what everybody deals with, right? So we turn things around generally in a 2-week time frame for round 1 comments, and then a 1 to 2 week time frame for round 2, 3, and the future. Sometimes the applicant doesn't submit for 1 month or 2 months. So that's the biggest struggle and hurdle and that we deal with in this, and how to kind of incorporate that within a timeline of 90 days to make this happen is probably the biggest struggle. And I'd be interested to hear others' thoughts on how to kind of tackle that scenario.
Anyone else want to chime in on that topic?
Revision turnarounds was the biggest, I guess, risk that we have. And I think that's what we're all looking at. Having that complete application right at the outset helps, but there will be revisions. And if they sit on them for too long, we've got that one-time developer extension, that 90-day extension the developers can ask for, and that helps. But really, I think walking through at that pre-op process and making sure they know, listen, we have to hit 90 days on this project. So we either hit 90 days with a yes, or you get to withdraw, or you get to see what happens with a denial. And so making clear on the outcomes of that and the importance of getting that turnaround, and then communicating what those revision turnarounds need to look like, I think is what we're hoping to do at the outset. And we're fingers crossed that that'll actually get the developers to respond.
Question in the chat is, are any communities on the call planning to hire on-call contract planners to help with expedited review if the project exceeds their capacity? And again, the grant funds, the LPC grant funds are available to help with that kind of thing. Anyone want to share?
Here in Gunnison, we're assessing the possibility of doing that primarily for utility analysis related to larger projects. We just simply don't have staff capacity to do comprehensive review of all the utility needs of a major PUD development, within that timeline. So yeah, we're assessing the possibility of using on-call services primarily for that. And we've already had some discussion with Robin about the applicability of that. And thank you for that, Robin. And also related to the 90-day approval, something we're looking at with our land development code update as far as, meeting that commitment is the idea of operating that on a sort of a shot clock scenario of, when it's in the city's hands for review, we're meeting our time commitments. However, we have absolutely no control of when a set of comments goes back to an applicant for them to redesign something that's necessary or turn things around. So we're looking at that as a possibility to resolve that timeline issue.
Hey, Robin, you're still on mute. Sorry.
Thank you. The Thursday mornings at 9 o'clock, if this is not the best time for you and you would like to request a different time of, different day of the week, different time of day, please let us know that in the chat here. When we send the follow-up email with links to the recording and everything, we will ask that again for all those folks who couldn't come today, so they can give us input. And again, the poll remains open if you'd like to weigh in on which topics you're most excited to learn about in future sessions. And I'm just looking to see if there are any other questions in the chat. Any last thoughts before we wrap up today? Once again, thank you so much to our panelists for taking time, to all of you for joining us. And thanks. Join us next month. Oh, real quick, I just wanted to remind everyone, June 19th, this session will not happen because it's the Juneteenth holiday. Enjoy your day off, hopefully. In July, our topic is all things ADUs. Join Mitch for that topic. And in August, on the 21st, we're talking about local financing strategies, such as using, tax measures and incentive rebate programs, all of those financing strategies. All right. Thank you all so much. Have a lovely rest of your Thursday. Go ahead and end the meeting for all. Thank you.